love that pentatonic scale. But what happens when you run into a progression that isn't? What are you gonna do? Yeah, what if you run into one of these? Can you still use the pentatonic scale? The short answer is sure. Now look, it's gonna feel a little different because you're not using it over a blues progression, which is where I think most guitar players are the most comfortable. That type of guitar playing is not necessarily going to work over these crazy million chords a second jazz progressions that you may encounter. So using the pentatonic scale over a jazz progression involves you breaking down that jazz progression into its most basic fundamental form to understand where pentatonic notes will fit over the progression. And you can do that by relating it to a regular traditional 1-4-5 blues progression. Of course, this is a jazz blues progression, so of course it has some overlapping elements. The pentatonic scale will also work in minor jazz progressions and ones where there's a lot more modulation happening than what I did here. But generally, these are the rules to follow no matter what chord progression you experience. You want to find places where the pentatonic sound will fit over a chord change and be able to relate that to the jazz context by avoiding the crazy, aggressive blues bending and vibrato stuff in favor of more smooth and sultry jazz sliding and picked articulated rhythms. So I'm going to demonstrate now what I would do over a progression just like the one that I played, and where I would throw in the pentatonic scale versus like major scale modes and some altered dominant things that you can find on my YouTube channel or in my course Guitar Super System, which is linked down in the description. So there's a few tips I'm going to give you on how to actually implement your pentatonic scale knowledge over jazz chord progressions. So basically what you want to do when you encounter a jazz progression, you want to break down what the heck is happening at a fundamental level. So for a chord progression like this, if you noticed, I really only played 2 chords. The rest were kind of walking bass notes. So this is what I mean by breaking down the chord progression to its fundamental state. What I did was play this B flat dominant 7, and then an approach note to really, I'm just playing this. Does that sound familiar? How about this? Same chords. But with these bass notes happening, you can easily overlook the fact that it's really just so that's pretty cool, right? We can see that this pentatonic scale is going to fit. It's just a matter of now moving on to the next tip, figuring out exactly where to place these notes in a convincing musical way. So you're not going to really use bluesy licks over a jazz progression because, you know, you have to fit into the style. There'll be moments where you can use bluesy stuff, but overall, you're going to convert your blues stylings into jazz stylings, and you can do that by avoiding too many bends and also by using slides instead of bends. So this blues lick would be better served in a jazz context as something like this. You can still keep a little vibrato, but generally in jazz, it's more about the smooth elements. So that vibrato, bending, raking stuff. You kind of want to throw those techniques to the wayside, at least dial them down when you're in a jazz context, because it just doesn't fit the mood, it doesn't fit the feel. You can still use, like I mentioned, the intervals of the minor pentatonic scale, but it just matters where you deliver them over which chords. So moving forward with that progression, we have B flat 7 to E flat 7, and then it just repeats that. So that basically, in a nutshell, was this. Just two chords. Again, making our blues reference. Back to those two chords. So the turnaround here is pretty interesting. We have B flat 7, C minor 7, D minor 7, and then we do this 2-5-1 cadence where it's actually a chromatic type of cadence. And if you're interested in learning the terminology that I'm using right now, then check out my course Guitar Super System, linked down in the description, and you will learn all about intervals and these seventh chords and these voicings and how they work in the major scale. So we have a bit of modal interchange happening here where we are in this B flat mixo sound, and then we modulate to this D minor sound. And then we're going to have this 4-2-5-1 turnaround. And basically 2-5-1 is referring to a 2 chord, a 5 chord, and then a 1 chord. And this is a chromatic cadence. So we're doing 2-5-1s in this key. And then we're going to play the same thing, another 2-5-1. And we can really do that all the way down the neck. Jazz. So of course, if you've never heard of 2-5-1s or cadences or anything like that, then all that stuff sounds pretty weird to you, but really just forget all the terminology and think about what's happening in the most fundamental, basic part of this progression. And all that means is basically sifting through all that jargon, so to say, and finding those bass chords. So we already identified these two. Now we can take the big meaty ones from this turnaround. So forget that and just focus on. So in summation, we have this. Now you're familiar with the term turnaround. That's like the last chord in a blues progression before it goes back to the beginning. So in a B flat, the turnaround would be an F7. You hear that resolution. So instead of using that F7 as our focus in this jazz progression, we're using a 2-3. So there's no reasoning behind that. It's just a creative liberty that I chose for this progression. But basically you can think of it as the same thing. It's functioning as the same thing as the 5 chord would in a blues progression. So I'm going to go over it again. That's it. That's the whole progression in layman's terms, how you would look at it when using the pentatonic scale to get around over those chords. So if you want my opinion, I would generally draw from that B flat mixolydian mode. And then use that B flat pentatonic sound over the 4 chord, because that is generally where the blues change happens. That's the 1, 4, and that is what's most closely related to a regular 1, 4, 5 blues progression. So that is where your tonalities will overlap between blues and jazz.